That is
I'm
villainous.
sure. Welcome back to RSReplay. This is our midseason special. Ravens are on a Week 10 bye. So we got, what is that, our third consecutive stress-free Sunday where we didn't have to live and die by Ravens football. With me, as always, is Ronald Toothe and our good friend Chris Schisler from the Russell Street Report. And yeah, I mean, it's halfway through the season. And one thing I always kind of like to do is look back at the first half and think, okay, what went as I expected and what has gone unexpected? What's been a surprise to you? Chris, let's start with you. What happened that you've expected and what's been kind of a surprise for you?
All right, so the surprise for me was how broken the defense seemed at the beginning of the season. I thought there would be some things that needed to gel. That Dolphins game is the anomaly of the century. I don't think anyone could have predicted that. But even the Patriots game, Mike McDonald's defense took a little bit. It was kind of like cement. When it was wet, it was horrible, and anything could get sunk in it. And now it seems to firmed up, and it's looking good, and I'm bought in. But I think the biggest surprise for me was just that defense looking like absolute garbage. The first few weeks of the season, week one was fine, but it was the Jets. The Jets game I feel better about every single week as the Jets continue to do well. But yeah, that defense starting out like that in that Dolphins game, unacceptable.
And what has gone exactly as you predicted or as you expected it would?
The Ravens can still run the football. I knew that was going to be the case. It took a little bit of time for the run game to get going too, but the Ravens having on a good day 150, close to 200 rushing yards, that tracks. That's about as predictable,
even as impressive as that is in this NFL. Ron, what about you? What thing about the Ravens has surprised you so far this season, and what thing were you not expecting?
Well, it's kind of funny because I would have very much imagined that they would be 6-3 coming into the bye, but if you had told me this was how they did it, I would have been blown away with the blown leads and just the way that this season almost started with a laughable amount of bad luck late in games. It was really crazy. I guess for a surprise, it would just be the fact that I guess my mind goes right to the offensive line, just because we saw how bad it was last year. And yeah, we had so many injuries along with every other position last year. But you just, you see the way that Linderbaum has come in and he's already being talked about with the best centers in the league. And, Stanley comes back and he's playing at pretty much right around the level he was before he left, which I don't think a lot of us expected that. I think a lot of us were, I don't know how many people would admit it today, but I think a lot of people were wondering if he would ever see the field as a Raven again, period. So you have those two things. And then you have, Morgan Moses coming in, he's a nice stopgap veteran, but we didn't really expect anything out of him. And you have all these things just happening at once. And then you add in Ben Powers to that too. And we'll talk about him a little later in one of the other segments, but just the way that this group has kind of gelled so far, and how they've quickly become one of the better units in the league was a pretty big surprise to me.
Yeah, the Ravens really prioritized that this offseason. What about a thing that you kind of expected that has come true?
I guess it probably seems like a bit of a cop-out, but just Lamar continuing to play as well as he did. And it's funny because he's got, all of his it feels a little bit like last year in the sense of on the offense, we've had, Bateman's out. Andrews has missed some time here and there. The running back situation has been what it was. And even despite not really having a full arsenal there every single time, he's still just continuing to be so great and really proving why he's one of the few quarterbacks in all of football that doesn't need that all-star cast around him, although God knows we'd love for him to have it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we were talking last week about that almost play of the year type play against the Saints, and, him able to pull that stuff out of his back pocket is crazy. Chris, we have a new guest on the pod. I don't think we've introduced Goose to the pod before. So you want to give us a quick explanation for the name? Tell us a little about him.
Well, it's a her actually, but Goose. With the name Goose, you get that a lot. So Tony Saragusa, great Raven. The Goose, well, she's named after Tony Saragusa, Super Bowl 35 champ, and sadly, the late, great Saragusa. I can't believe he's not here anymore, but Goose is still picking up the show. So
Love to hear it. Love always having that love for our former Ravens legends.
she's been good right now.
Yeah, I think. I think for me, what I expected, kind of surprisingly, is how they've used Kyle Hamilton as a matchup eraser. He's young. I was not expecting him to come in and be a starting safety right away. And even when Marcus Williams went down, they made it clear Geno Stone was the next man up. He's played really well, but Hamilton has really been just trying to get his feet wet, learn different, positions, learn the NFL defense, and I think he's done a really good job with that. But that was one of the things I was kind of expecting from the Ravens, was for him to be a little bit underwhelming at first, and then the last 3-4 weeks, I feel like he's really, really come on as he's gotten more comfortable. And the Ravens have, they're figuring out how to use him, right? He's a pretty unique player, and we've seen across the league, unique players on both sides of the ball are best served when you're creative with them, when you find ways to accentuate their skills and their strengths. And I think they're doing that with Kyle Hamilton. They
also figured out that they have to actually play him to, when you looked at his snap counts.
There was a reason he was. I mean, you talk about the blown leads. There's a reason he wasn't in as much early. Again, the dude's 21 years old. He's incredibly talented, but he's still relatively football aged fairly young. And the Ravens trusted Geno Stone to step in for Marcus Williams for a reason. He's played great ball. Something that surprised me. You talked about Jackson playing really, really well, but there have been some stretches where he just surprises me with the throws he misses, with just the routine throws outside the numbers. I think I highlighted on Tail of the Tape a few weeks ago or last Monday, just him missing throws that you really expect him to make. And to a certain extent, you're like, oh yeah, his targets and receivers, this and that. But it did kind of surprise me a little bit earlier in the season, and even the last few games when he just doesn't see open guys. And it just felt like this was kind of the next step of his development. It felt like last year he was coming to the line and being a lot more active and going through his reads. And then that kind of went away started this year. It's starting to come back. I think he's understanding he's going to have to dink and dunk down the field a little bit more, but a little bit surprised by that. Ron took, my other idea, which was the offensive line, Ronnie Stanley in particular, returning all the way to all pro form. Just nothing anyone saw coming. I'm sure I could go dig up an old tweet of mine that was like, if Ronnie Stanley returns to Pro Bowl form, it'll be great. But that's not a Ronnie Stanley's going to return to Pro Bowl form kind of claim. So just really impressive from him. Let's talk about the offense. Let's start to hand out some midseason awards here. The first one is offensive MVP. And I think since Ron, you and I both talked about Lamar Jackson, Chris, Lamar Jackson's probably the easiest offensive MVP. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your take on Lamar so far this year?
Well, look, Lamar Jackson has missed throws, like you said. There are games where I'm a little frustrated. The Tampa Bay game in particular, not hitting DeMarcus Robinson on the fourth down play, which was right there. And how many plays have there been that are very much that same way? But you know what? This team is a lot less exciting without Lamar Jackson. I thought what he did against the Saints with his running ability was fantastic. I think when the Ravens lean in and just say Lamar be Lamar, things go well. I think when we don't lean in and we say, let's see how far we can take this, it doesn't go as well. So Lamar's a good passer, but when you lean into his running ability, he becomes a better passer. When you get it, we started to see him roll out, and those plays where you shift the whole offense, it looks like a running play over the top to Isaiah Likely. We need more of that kind of thing. We need more play fake. We need more guesswork for the defense, because when Lamar's Lamar, there's no player more exciting in the NFL. And when he's hot, the Ravens aren't going to lose. They're just not going to lose. That Dolphins game beside, that is the one time Lamar's ever been hot. They're like, yeah, we have no chance because we can't stop anybody. But Lamar has played so well in some of these games. And even in the games where he hasn't played great, he's really given us a chance to win. He's never he might be a part of the problem when things are going wrong, but he's always it's kind of like a basketball player. Keep shooting because it's gonna go in sometimes.
Even games where he throws a few picks, he is still the reason we win the game at the end. I think
Exactly.
it's interesting you mentioned like the Ravens getting him on the move. I think that's something Roman's been a little bit more intentional about because, I don't think it's, unfair to say Lamar probably is not a top 5 pure pocket passer in the NFL. I think there are probably 5 quarterbacks who pass out of the pocket better than he does. But I'm not sure that there's maybe Patrick Mahomes is the only guy who's better throwing on the move than Lamar Jackson is. And that's not just, being able to move while throwing, but timing, finding the right windows, the right arm slot. And so, I agree. I think that's a really important part of his game. Ron, who's your offensive MVP? I know Lamar's kind of already off the board here.
Yeah, he would be up there. You can go a few different ways with it because it's been like such a committee approach. Like the first one that comes to mind is, of course, Andrews, but that almost feels like a cop-out. Like part of me almost thinks you could say Linderbaum at times. Part of me thinks you could say Stanley, even though he missed, the first good chunk of the year. It's really tough. Like, I almost just want to give it to the group as a whole. Like, I guess my answer will be Mark Andrews just because it's the easy answer. But honestly, I would just give it to the unit as a whole. The way that they've gelled. And like you said, there's definitely been those spurts where they just, stop being effective altogether. The first half of that Tampa Bay game being a good example. But really, besides from Lamar, I feel like it's been a really solid group effort from everybody.
I'm gonna cheat a little, and I'm gonna draw the ire of the masses. Greg Roman has finally figured out what he's doing in the last, I feel like 2 or 3 weeks. Play calling, deploying his players right, even without Bateman and Andrews. And the Ravens offense has just continued to move. And so, in lieu of, I could say the whole offensive line. I could say Ronnie Stanley. I think Stanley's been a huge part of the return to excellence. But I really think that part of the reason this offensive line is playing so well is because Greg Roman has done a really good job putting them in positions to succeed. Getting Stanley and Linderbaum on the move in zone blocking, giving guys help depending on specific pass protection matchups that I feel like he's done poorly with that in the past. And I feel like his usage of Devin Duvernay, the way he's deploying Patrick Ricard, the way he deployed Isaiah Likely in the last few weeks has just really come along as kind of like, okay, this is kind of the Greg Roman that we miss having, that just feels like he's got a very cohesive offensive plan. He's not keying on one guy. I think the keying on one guy is half a Roman thing, half a Lamar thing. And then Andrews and Bateman are out. You have to spread the ball around. And he did a great job dialing up a lot of different plays for different guys. And Dan Orlovsky and the team at NFL Live did a really good segment on how the running game is back. And the Ravens are just so far ahead of this curve because so many teams are playing more of that too high split safety, light boxes that you can run against. And while, they can change their defense somewhat to adjust to the Ravens, you can't change the core of your defense just to play one team in the regular season. And, it's going to be the discussion again come playoffs. But there's a reason the Ravens held on to Greg Roman. And I think it's because they anticipated this trend that things are going to go back and forth in a passing league. And you go from a passing league and everyone's defending the pass. Suddenly having a really strong running game is really, really powerful. And so is that going to change the Ravens' outcome in the playoff this year? It's tough to say that without Rashad Bateman. Having Rashad Bateman, even with that running game, is a key part of it. But there's no one I trust to get the current offense to the playoffs more than Greg Roman. He knows exactly what he has. It's built to his specifications. And he's kind of figured out how to work it with some of these secondary playmakers. So I'm going to shout him out. I know that's probably a pretty bold take for a lot of people, but and this still might be his last year in Baltimore. That still might also be the case. But based on where the roster is right now, I just think he's done a tremendous job getting this offense in shape. Onto the defensive side of the ball. I'll go first here because I am very locked in on one guy who to me is playing better than anyone else. It's Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey's having an absurd all-pro year. Got knocked as having a down year last year, which is somewhat true. I think definitely statistically it was, but I think he was playing through injury and dealing with
and they were asking him to be Superman. He had to do everything.
Lamar the defense to a certain extent. And this year he's just locked down his side. He's playing great ball. He's tackling better than almost anyone on the team. And yeah, I mean, that's the kind of play that you're like, man, now I feel like I can go take on any of these top teams and their wideouts in the AFC because I've got Marlowe on one side locking him down, and he just doesn't need as much help from safeties, and that lets you devote those resources elsewhere. Ron, who's your defensive MVP so far this year?
Well, yeah, Humphrey would have been mine, but besides from that, I got to go Justin Houston here. I mean, it's almost unspeakable, unthinkable what he's doing at age 33, right? Mm-hmm. And just, last year it very much looked like he was, let me choose my words carefully here. He didn't really look like himself last year, at least what we've come to know Justin Houston for.
Well, he just wasn't getting home. It was like, has he lost that one step that you need to convert pressures into sacks? Have you lost that? It's not a lot. You still have all the moves and stuff, but that one step, have you lost it?
Yeah. And part of that could also be attributed to the fact that there were so many injuries in the secondary. Quarterbacks were able to get the ball out a lot quicker because guys were wide open, 3 yards downfield most of the time. So whatever the reasoning is, he's getting home now. And he always has, it feels like, I call it the Justin Houston drive. Every game, it feels like he just has that one drive where he takes over and completely changes the game in one way or another, whether it's, a big sack, a strip sack, whether it's like the interception he had at the end of that game in New Orleans. It's incredible to see what he's done and the way that he's kind of rejuvenated himself after a solid but really kind of less than stellar first season in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that you think about the Ravens like this offseason, do they sign an edge rusher? What do they do here? Because we're all calling for there's everything with Zadarius Smith, wanting Von Miller, Chandler Jones. There are a lot of big names on the market. And, to go back to Houston, I felt like, okay, I'm very happy to have Houston back on the team, but I would much prefer him as a third guy, a rotational guy. Like you said, make sure we keep his stamina up and he's able to just push the pocket. And, the Ravens are now set up to do that. They're getting their depth back on the outside linebacker position. Malik Harrison's played some pretty good ball in that 3-4 when they brought it out. And so, Houston playing as well as he did, you have to imagine this is probably the only stretch of the season, these last few games, where he's still going to have to play that many snaps. Now with Bowser ramping back up, Ojabo coming back, Houston's really going to be able to just pin his ears back and go after quarterbacks again and again and again. And you think especially keeping him up for the playoffs, I think that's going to be a huge, huge part of our playoff run is Houston and guys like Campbell, the veterans who they're in this to win a ring at this point. And, getting that last piece, that last little bit of hunger out of them to get the ring. Chris, who's your defensive MVP so far?
Well, I'm going to say that Justin Madubuike has played unbelievable football, and the interior pressure has made a huge difference. And I think it's allowing Mike Macdonald to do all the things that he wants. I think Mike Macdonald is a guy that needs his defensive front to eat, and Justin Madubuike is eating. Travis Jones is playing well. Calais Campbell has had a really strong season. But when you look up front and Justin Houston's taking off the list, well, then it's got to be Madubuike. I think he's playing out of his mind. I think he's going to earn some money the way he's playing. And to me, I say, you know what? We're gonna have to keep this guy because his potential is off the charts. He is finally the Justin Madubuike we have been waiting for, and I'm so excited about it. I think you guys picked the first obvious two guys. I think Madubuike is that guy who's a little unsung. I think we even spend more attention to Patrick Queen or Marcus Peters, but I really think the best player on the field on the front seven might actually be Justin Madubuike. I think he does a lot of the dirty work, and he gets a lot of interior pressure. And I like what Mike McDonald's defense is allowing him to do. He's allowing him to just penetrate when he's got a matchup he can dominate. Don't worry about two-gapping. Get down the field and do something with it. And that's exciting to me. Him and Travis Jones have been fun to watch, with Madubuike, he might actually be the most improved player, and he might be the MVP of the defense. So that's my
yeah. I mean, he's been phenomenal. The Ravens have talked him up since he was drafted, and it's taken him a couple years to really develop into that force in the middle. He showed flashes as a rookie. He showed flashes last year. Last year was supposed to be the breakout, and he just need a little bit more time. He's got more depth around him now. That's another thing is the depth of that defensive line around him is better. He's getting into more one-on-one matchups, and there are very few defensive linemen who can consistently win double teams, if any, that can actually consistently win double teams. But then now that there are other threats around him, even if those guys aren't winning their matchups, they have to be blocked. And then Madubuike is left in these one-on-ones that he can dominate. And so I agree. I'm just really excited about how he's played so far this year.
Still not ready to call him Aaron Donald yet, though. I know that I forget who somebody maybe was, trying to make that a thing. I forget.
But there's only one Aaron Donald. There's only one Aaron Donald.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know.
I'll call him Fletcher Cox, but I won't call him Aaron Donald.
But see, Cox and Madubuike are different types of players. Madubuike is in that same vein of players. Certainly, no, I don't think anyone is saying he's at the same level. No one was saying
I
was
totally teasing. I get the message that was behind it. I was just.
But you think about like the vertical, like the lineage, the evolution of players, and like it's clear that's the path he's trying to go down. I mean, look, Aaron Donald was a ferocious kind of flow blockers aside run stopper at the beginning of his career and figured out how to push the pocket very early in his career, a lot faster than most guys do. Madubuike trains with him. I mean, there's a reason that they do similar things, even if Madubuike can't necessarily pull off everything Donald does. He's still trying a lot of the similar things. And one of my favorite phrases is good writers borrow from other writers. Great writers steal outright. And I think that that's true of football players. You see, I want Odafe ripping off Justin Houston's pass rush moves. I want them all to rip off the best players' moves because that's why they're the best. Speaking of best, it's a little hard to, I think, nail down like best special teams player, not because it's Justin freaking Tucker every single time. But what is your favorite special teams play of the season so far? I think the Ravens really put emphasis on special team, and I think it's shown up in multiple games for the Ravens so far this season. Chris, what do you got?
I hate to bring up week 2 again, but this was a good week 2 moment. Devin Duvernay starts it off with a kickoff return for a touchdown. I believe 103 yards. Look, when Devin Duvernay just gets a little bit of a window, he's gone. And I can't believe how many times people have kicked to him this season. Like, just stop letting him, like, kicking out of the back of the end zone. He is a weapon. I really like that play. It felt like it was going to be a special Sunday. And it really felt like, oh, man, we're starting this off with a bang. To start a game off that way is an intoxicating feeling. It gets you going. And that's my favorite play. I hate that it came in a game that I hate to remember. But Devin Duvernay starting things off, I think it's the obvious special teams play of the year.
Ron, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Chris's sentiment as much as we'd like to forget that day. My special teams play of the year it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's nothing super duper impressive considering what we've seen from him at this point, but it's Tucker's game winner against Cincinnati, just because everything that went into it in the way that they embarrassed us twice last year. And obviously anybody who's on Twitter has seen the way that their fan base likes to chirp, even though they've had a combined zero, you know what I'm trying to say. They've been horrible for 3 decades. They get a tiny bit of success and all of a sudden they can't stop running their mouths. So just from a personal kind of standpoint, that was my favorite one. And it was just nice to see Justin Tucker be able to do what he does again, hit a game winner.
Yeah. I think I've got a couple different nominees, but I think the main one I have is the Justice Hill forced muffed punt against Tampa Bay. Justice Hill had really good coverage down the field, and basically this is basically a new strategy for these gunners to push the guy they're covering into the return man, because then you're not causing the muff. You won't get flagged for interfering, which I'm sure the NFL is going to have to look at. But it is like very much the Ravens are preaching: get down there and cause chaos, make make them make perfect plays. That's been the ethos of the defense too. But on special teams, it's make them make the play. Don't give them an easy, fair catch. Don't, make them make tough plays. Surround them with just people and limbs flying around. And that was a great example. And that was a game where the offense needed that little. I mean, they only scored a field goal, I think, on that drive, but where the offense really needed that little kick, and the defense was getting walked up and down the field a little bit that first half. And so having special teams play like that, just burst onto the scene and make an impact in these games. It's something I wanted to talk about a little bit, the roster management related to special teams. Obviously they're always going to prioritize kicker, punter, long snapper. Totally cool with that. We know how important it is. And then we see over the course of the year roster spots given to guys like Delshon Phillips and AJ Klein. And, Klein's in Chicago, I think, just got released, was really a non-factor. Phillips was claimed off waivers at the Jets, doesn't play a role in the defense. Hasn't really stood out to me on special teams in any way. I mean, I don't think he's necessarily been a liability. He does have the team's third highest PFF special teams grade for whatever that's worth. But there are times where I just wonder if a roster spot like that is just better off going to a player who just has more of an impact just in terms of actually adding value game to game instead of just kind of making sure the special teams unit is well-rounded. Because I trust, at a certain point, all the investment in special teams coaches, you trust them to get the job done and coach guys up. So I don't know what your guys' thoughts on that were, but that's just something I've noticed with this team and kind of thought about consistently is like the emphasis on special teams is great, except when we start adding guys that only bring special teams to the table.
Yeah, it's a fine. You're walking a fine line the entire time, especially when roster spots are so precious, and especially when you're a team that's had such a weird string of bad luck with injuries. Like, you need guys in there who are going to plug and play. So it's definitely about finding that sweet spot in between, because ultimately you are going to have guys who can only do special teams. Like, you're not going to be able to fill a 53-man roster with 53 guys who can step in there and be, fully effective and do exactly what you want them to do. So, and
there's probably a measure of, best available free agent out there might just be a guy who's really good at special teams. It's just kind of a weird thing to see them do every year. And I feel like Phillips is probably a pretty easy cut if we need roster space now for Ojabo, Kolar. I forget exactly what the status of those guys are. I think Ojabo's been added, Kolar not yet. So, it makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, here's a guy we can cut. But you just wonder in the first place, adding another receiver or something earlier in the year, being a little bit more prepared for what is going to happen with receivers and corners, which is the most injured positions. But, I think that's something I'm kind of curious to see what they do about it next year. Chris?
I call it the Chris Moore honorary roster spot. For years, Chris Moore was the guy who did absolutely zilch, nothing on offense, but amazing on special teams. Justice Hill, until recently, has kind of been that guy. He's picked it up on offense, I can't lie. But we've always had a guy that has no point for the entire offense or defense. But special teams-wise, great. Now, I used to develop into players that would start for the defense, like Jameel McClain started on special teams, worked his butt off as an undrafted free agent, became an integral part of the defense. The problem we're seeing is the Ravens expected some of these guys to get into roles into the offense or the defense, and they really haven't taken that step. That's not really the Ravens' fault. That's actually them just continuing to do the same thing they've done. They just haven't been lucky enough to find those guys who transcend that special teams role.
Yeah, and I think that, that's something they always prioritize. And, their approach to it seems like it's starting to change a little bit, especially drafting. They're not drafting guys so intent on getting rookie special teams contributors anymore. Guys they want to coach up in there, but they're definitely not drafting them because of that. Speaking of drafting, 11 rookies, huge draft class for the Ravens, 10 of them making this roster. 11 of them making this roster. Josh Ross has just been, disappointing with his injury, hasn't been able to make as much of an impact. But this was a big draft for the Ravens. A lot of people talked about having this many picks, using that many picks, not trading them, and the importance of getting them right. And it feels like early reviews on this draft class are pretty solid so far. Ron, we'll get this one out of the way. Who is your favorite rookie?
Well, I mean, we don't have to say it, but it's Isaiah Likely. And I'm glad that he was able to have a couple weeks of like really getting in there and doing something. So I wouldn't have just looked like a total homer by picking him. But yeah, I'm absolutely picking him. And spoiler alert, it's not the last time he'll be in my selections for this. I mean, we love what we see. The fact that we can sit here and talk about, oh, Andrews might be out this week, and we're like not really sweating it because we have him, and obviously nobody's marked. And well, yeah, that may have something to do with it. But even going into the Saints game, that was a little more challenging of a prospect than it actually ended up being. And he caught a touchdown. He didn't really do anything else besides from that, but he was blocking really well. He's really improved his blocking, which was pretty much the biggest knock on him in the draft process. And even early on, like in the preseason, I forget which game it was where he just got absolutely blown up when he was trying to make a block. And it was like, ooh, so, and even earlier in the year, the only time he'd be on the field, they were obviously passing. Like it was very much a tell when he was out there. So now that he's out there blocking and he's really made an effort to kind of improve that over this last couple months, it's only going to bode well for him. And I think he's primed to have a pretty big second half relative to what you can as a pass catcher, a number 2 tight end pass catcher in this kind of offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were talking about it before we went live with, Mark Andrews not playing not playing against the Saints. We're not sure if he's going to play against the Panthers. And even if he does, the Ravens kind of have the incentive to give him a little bit more rest and rotate Likely into his role a little bit more, which is something that Likely does really well. And so I do think you're right. I think that even now that Likely is kind of broken out a little bit and we understand that, okay, the more we can feature him a little bit more, I think that, that'll help us keep a lid on Andrew's workload and make sure that he is able to heal up and be ready for the playoffs. Because that's obviously, where we're going to need Andrews, both of them for sure, but Andrews the most to really emerge as that tight end one. Chris, what about you? Who's been your favorite Ravens rookie so far this year?
I'm going to go with a guy who moves Pro Bowl defensive tackles 15 yards down the field, Tyler Linderbaum. Look, Tyler Linderbaum is a guy who can move, and he can reach every block. But we knew that. We knew that was exactly what he was in Iowa. To be the man who can win the wrestling match, to be the nasty, mean-spirited, I'm going to move you whether you want me to or not kind of offensive lineman. What is it about offensive linemen from Iowa? It tends to do good for the Baltimore Ravens. Honestly, I have a theory we should draft an offensive lineman from Iowa every year, even if it's in the 7th round. Just take a guy from Iowa every year. It works for the Ravens. Look, Tyler Linderbaum is a guy that I am incredibly impressed with. And the fact that on draft night, I was kind of annoyed that we went there because we just traded away Marquise Brown. I wanted more of a splash second first round pick. And we got that safe, solid, can't go wrong pick that you're like, oh, that's good, but I'm not like super excited about. And the fact that I'm not annoyed about that anymore means he's my favorite rookie. That's the work he's done this season. Very impressed with Tyler Linderbaum. Kyle Hamilton was hard not to say, but I'm going to go Tyler Linderbaum.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about Kyle Hamilton earlier. I think he's probably my favorite rookie, but since I talked about him a little bit earlier, let's move back a few rounds and let's talk about someone whose name hasn't come up in the last few weeks, Daniel Faalele. With Stanley's return up in the air, drafting a project that Faalele was, and I don't think it's unfair to call him that, was kind of a whoa move because there really was not a clear left tackle successor. There, it was a hodgepodge of Juwan James, McCary. James got injured again. McCary might have had to play center because Linderbaum was injured, and all of a sudden we needed Daniel Faalele step in at left tackle, and he played really, really well. I was just blown away by how smoothly he transitioned over to the left side. And I think that's something that we've kind of forgotten about because he hasn't been involved, but thinking about the future, thinking about what the Ravens want to build on their offensive line in front of Lamar Jackson going into the future. And it just feels like they quietly have a rising star offensive tackle who is just getting all of the developmental time they need. Like I talked about with Kyle Hamilton, really having a plan for him coming in, which was, disrupted a little bit by the injury and him having to start at left tackle, but that went really well. And it just gives you more encouragement on what he can be. And, I think Morgan Moses has kind of kept his starting job with his play the last few weeks. I was kind of riding him a little bit weeks, 5 and 6. He's really played well since then. So I think he's still got the job locked down. But, Falele, I'd love to get him, use him a little bit more in goal line packages, stuff like that. Just get him on the field because he is really a natural athlete, a really natural player. And so I know he hasn't played much, but I'm really excited about him beefing up this O-line years to come. Most improved. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, just really quick. I just wanted to we won't dwell on it, but I just wanted to kind of get a temp check on the two guys that you can really probably look at in this class as the dud so far, Jalen Armour-Davis and Tyler Beatty. Where are you guys at with them? You kind of ready to throw in the towel already, or are you still waiting and seeing?
Yeah, so Beatty was a 6th round pick. I think he was kind of a victim of some of their wonky roster management around cuts. I remember on that pod we were little curious as to why all the cuts went the way they did, and it just seems like the Ravens just basically wanted to give him a redshirt year that. They felt like Mike Davis gave them a more reliable option while they were waiting for Edwards and Dobbins to come back. Drake's, I think part of it was because Drake became free. I don't think they were expecting Kenyon Drake to be a free agent. And once he were, they were like, well, this is objectively much better than what Tyler Beatty can bring us as a rookie 6th rounder. And I also think, and they were right, that there wasn't a lot of interest around the league in him otherwise. And so stashing him on the practice squad isn't, never ideal for a rookie, but I'm glad we at least kept him. As far as Jalen Armour-Davis, I actually still think he's got a lot of upside. He just never got the chance to play much or consistently at Alabama, and struggled with injuries. And I think the Ravens were hoping he would catch on a little bit faster, but I still think that he'll emerge as a starting outside quarterback for us by his 3rd season. I just think he needs that time. I think he needs that time. He's still. I remember reading about him pre-draft that one of the knocks on him was just him not getting to play a ton in college. I think he medical redshirt, 8 games his freshman season, special teams as a sophomore, and only played his junior year as a starter. And so a lot of drafting him was projecting him into the future and hoping he can take those next development steps at this level. Chris, I don't know your thoughts.
Well, I think you kind of stole it. I don't think Jalen Armour-Davis was ready. I don't think he was ready. He's a guy that has the talent. The NFL is very, very consistent. If you have the traits, you will continue to get chances until you're just done. So Jalen Armour-Davis,
ask Antonio Brown,
right? Josh Gordon's another one where it's just if you're big, strong, and fast, we'll be like, how many chances can we give you, buddy?
Yeah.
So Jalen Armour-Davis is a guy. I don't think he's going anywhere. Beatty was my guy. I was obsessed with Beatty. I thought his low center of gravity had a little bit of Ray Rice to him. And I don't throw around comps just to throw around. Now, every year in the draft, someone says, oh, well, this guy reminds me of Anquan Boldin. And I'm like, really? Does he really remind you of Anquan Boldin? Think about that for a second. So when I say that Tyler Beatty reminded me of Ray Rice, I am hoping that this guy gets in there and gets a chance to do it for the Ravens because he has traits that I think are a little rare. I don't think he's got things that everybody has. So I want to see Tyler Beatty succeed. I think Jalen Armour-Davis definitely will.
Yeah, one other thing with Jalen Armour-Davis that I remember, and I feel like we continue to have to remind ourselves this, is there's a human element to this. He's a father. He's got a kid to provide for and take care of. And I know there's NIL deals in college now, but a starting corner at Alabama still, I don't know. He's definitely not making as much money as he could be in the NFL, even as a 4th round pick. I think
he probably made a pretty good amount of money.
Well, actually, I don't know. He was a not very prominent player. He was at Alabama, probably made some, but not nearly as much as you can make in the NFL. And I think there's that aspect to think about where he's thinking about where can I take my development to the next level. And with Alabama being where it's at with his program, he was just like, look, I'm just going to go to the NFL. I feel like I'm part of that human element with taking care of your family. It's like, all right, well, maybe you're not quite ready, but you got to get ready fast and go be that guy. So, I think it'll be interesting to see how his career develops, just because the Ravens are so super high on him. Big character guy. So
yeah, that I love all that, but part of me, I guess, is also a little bit afraid because he did have the injury stuff in college, and now he's missed all of this year, and a good portion of it has been because of injury and also healthy scratches as well. But part of me almost wonders, it's like, did he come out just because he knew, like, he had to capitalize on this, basically sort of a, if I get injured, like re-injured sort of thing. Basically what I'm trying to get at is, I'm very concerned that he's just going to be one of those guys that every year he keeps coming back and every year he keeps getting hurt. And it's just going to be one of those things where, 3 years from now, he ends up, out of here. And I hope not, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. And that was why I asked the question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's early, and the other thing is COVID. How much COVID impacted these guys' ability to develop and learn in college, fewer games, practices, distancing requirements, all that virtual stuff. And so I don't know. I mean, I still think 9 for 11 hit rate is pretty phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
If this draft class, if half of these guys turn out how we're expecting, it's a foundational draft class for this team. But part of that is getting these players to where we think they can. And so that's kind of the basis of our next award, most improved. Chris, you mentioned Justin Madubuike, who's definitely a guy who I think we probably were a few of us were thinking of. Who do you got for this award?
Ben Powers.
I like
and
it.
I think here's the deal. No one was harder. I even wrote an article after the first few weeks. Hey, let's go to Cleveland. I was done because I was convinced through camp that Ben Powers wasn't the guy. I've never been impressed with him. And you know what? I'm still not like, this guy is a Pro Bowler, great. No, but this guy has just been solid. He's doing the job. He's making the blocks. Our run game is not, look, he's not the weak link anymore. I don't actually see a weak link in this offense, and that's the entire point. The beginning of the season, I was like, oh, God, this Ben Powers guy, I can't. And the fact of the matter is, it's been about 4 or 5 weeks since I've said his name with a cuss word in front of it.
Well, for the most part, if you're not talking about an offensive lineman, that's usually a good thing.
And that's my entire point. I don't think left guard going into the season was the big drama for the offensive line. Other than
how many sacks has Ben Powers allowed this season? Does anyone know?
I'm going to say 1.
0. He's been one of the best pass blocking left guards in the NFL, alongside Kevin Zeitler, one of the best pass blocking guard duos in the NFL. And I think you're absolutely right. His ability to earn that job really came down to his ability to protect the quarterback. He's never really been a dominant run blocker, but he very much knows his assignments. I think that's very clear. He's been very on top of his game mentally. And in terms of pass blocking, I mean, there's a reason that Lamar has not been flushed out of the pocket immediately very often this season. It's because that interior 3 is a fierce pass blocking trio. Ron, who's your most improved player this year?
Well, mine is a guy that, so there a lot of times fandom can tend to do this thing where they're like, oh, give so-and-so, more targets. And the person they're referring to, like, just kind of stinks. And they think that, like, the only reason that he's not succeeding is because he's not out there. When in reality, the reason he's not out there is because he stinks. I won't mention anybody in particular. But in this one case is a guy who people were clamoring for him to be like, get more of a role. And they were actually dead on. And that was Devin Duvernay. The way that he has been able to actually mold himself into a legitimate threat on the outside this year has been incredible. And sorely needed as well, with Rashad Bateman being injured and Mark Andrews missing some time here and there. He's been tremendous. He's made so many game-changing plays, and he's almost kind of not full-time, but really helped supplement that spot that Marquise Brown left behind, the deep balls, things like that, stretching the field, not being able to stack the box against Lamar when you see him out there because it's, he might take me deep here. And of course, just all the great things he does in the special teams, like Chris mentioned before. I mean, he's the way that he's molded himself to be a complete player. I don't think it's just a result of, he's getting more snaps now. I think he put in a lot of work in this offseason, and it's paying off for him in a big way.
Well, and look, it goes back to what I was saying with Greg Roman earlier, finding ways to use their strengths. Duvernay, didn't get used on a ton of deep balls, was used on a lot of like shallow crossers where it was tough for him to really get a lot of space to move. And so I think one of the things is Lamar and Duvernay's chemistry has, grown a lot. Roman is manufacturing more touches, those sweeps, things like that for him, more screens.
Dude, that day, not to cut you off, that day that first day you and I were at camp, and the first 3 plays they ran in Team O were end arounds to Devin Duvernay. Like right then, that should have been a sign like, there's plans for him this year. He's not just going to be a kick returner.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things the Ravens really hate doing is tipping their hand. They even to a fault maybe. They're very focused on deception, things like that, and trying to, keep Duvernay from being like, we've got a weapon to unleash. Now, we kind of had to unleash him early with Bateman, and now we're really starting to use him in different ways. But I think the cool thing about this team, too, is I wasn't even thinking of Devin Duvernay for this award. Like, it's so obvious now that you mentioned it, but I wasn't even thinking of Duvernay because I had other guys. I was also thinking Powers, but a couple of the other guys I was thinking. One of them I want to shout out is Patrick Queen. I just think he continues to just, linebacker play is not a straight line up. It's not a steep climb. You're going to get better gradually, and I think that he's starting to again and again trust himself more. But the guy I really want to shout out is Geno Stone, man. I mean, Geno Stone has just played some amazing football. And the reason I say that is kind of like I said with Ben Powers. I should probably add a caveat to this. When you're talking about like your not one of your best star offensive linemen, kind of the same thing to your best star safeties, you don't want to be mentioning their name, because if you're talking about your rotational safety, usually it's because they missed an assignment or it's because your offensive lineman missed a block. We just haven't been talking that much about Geno Stone because he's just been very quietly holding the defense down where Marcus Williams was. He is playing the same role. He has just stepped 100%. Into that role, and he's playing so well. That pass breakup against Tampa Bay really stands out as he is picking up the game mentally now too. And so I think, you see the amount of guys on this team that have improved. And there's so many others I could mention. Broderick Washington, I think, is another. I actually think Patrick Ricard has actually taken his game to a new level this year. And there's one other, Josh Oliver.
Yeah,
and Josh Oliver emerged as a legitimate tight end 2 in this league out of pure blocking prowess alone. And I can't say enough about the way that, he's traded. I've said this before. I know I have, but he's traded the Ravens for a conditional 7th round pick. It's the lowest thing you can be traded for in the NFL. And basically took that as a kick in the butt. I got to get better. And, I'll talk about this a little more in a minute, but he just has done such a great job just saying, look, I'm going to embrace the Raven way. I'm going to get really, really good at blocking because that's how I'm going to get on the field. That's how I'm going to get snaps. So just shout out to him as well.
All right, 2 things. One, don't ever refer to him as tight end 2 ever again. And also Geno Stone, he is an example of what I just mentioned. He is one of those guys that I think always had it and just needed the snaps out there. And now that he's finally getting them, he's cashing in a big way.
He looked good. He looked good last year when he had to step in those few times. And yeah, absolutely.
The Jets or Giants are going to give him a lot of money. I can assure you that.
Yeah. So one point I want to make about this whole conversation we're having is after the Bills game, I was pretty furious. I kept screaming, I'm done. I think everyone in the zip code of 21048 knew I was done. And I question if there was a buy-in problem with this team. And this 3-game winning streak and the way we're on a roll and the way that these players are doing their jobs, being fundamentally sound, really seeming to hone in on the homework. The way this team was working, there's no buy-in problem with this team. There's no John Harbaugh problem with this team, other than the fact that the same things happen every week. But there is a lot of the concerns I had after the Bills game have been put on mute. They've just been completely washed away. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation about Geno Stone and playing like a Raven and just doing his job, that to me is a sign of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that buy-in, people talk about Harbaugh and this and that, and his players love him. And the fact that I think, we've talked about this a few times, you don't want Peters yelling at him on the sidelines every week. But the fact that you even see that, where most coaches are just, they're proud, they're emotional, whatever it is, they just won't let that be. And Harbaugh is a very look, bring it on. We're working together. Like, I'm not, I'm not the end all be all football expert. And, he brings that competitive spirit and welcomes it to a certain extent. I think he's done a good job this year. It hasn't been perfect. I still like the aggressiveness. But best coaching, this is kind of interesting to look at kind of the position groups and what coaches you feel like are making an impact on either side of the ball. So who's been your favorite? Who's done the best coaching job so far this year in Baltimore? I'll start with you, Ron.
I mean, it's got to be Joe. I always, what is it? Delisandris. I always butcher his last name. Delisandro. Is it? Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. The offensive line coach for all the reasons that we've mentioned leading up to now. Just the way that he's been able to kind of get this group to gel together after an admittedly rocky first couple weeks. It's been awesome. And what more can you really say? He's done a great job. And I'll admit, if I tried to get into the specifics of what he's doing or anything like that, I'd be talking out of my ass. I'll just, I don't know what he's doing, but whatever he's doing, it's working. So keep it up, Coach.
It seems like one thing, and again, I'm, going to take a stab at it. Communication, I feel like Kevin Zeitler and Stanley really taken leadership roles communicating on that line. I feel like Zeitler's done a really good job keeping Linderbaum sharp on the snaps the last few games. It was a little rocky to start, and I just think Zeitler's been on him a little bit more. And, I absolutely agree. The improvement in the unit with so many moving parts, with a rookie, Ronnie coming back, Powers and Zeitler were the only constants on that line, and Powers was not even necessarily a constant until he fully earned that job. And so to get this line together and have them in shape and to have them rotate Jawan James and McCary in and out and Falele in and out and barely miss a beat is just a really impressive coaching job. I agree. Chris, your favorite coaching job of the first half?
To me, it's T. Martin, the wide receivers coach of the Ravens. Look, we have a tight end heavy offense that likes to run the football, and these wide receivers could easily check out, get bored, and be a problem. But you have wide receivers blocking every single play. We talked about Devin Duvernay and all the things he's done to become a legitimate weapon on the outside. We've talked about Devin Duvernay, but the fact that Demarcus Robinson in the Tampa Bay game can go from being ignored the last few games before that, catch 6 passes on 8 targets, have a night. The fact that these receivers are constantly honed in, the route running of this receiving core, better than it's been in a long time. Now, I still think the passing schemes leave some to be desired, but the route running is fantastic. The ability to just get everything done the proper way and to really be honed in and focused. I think the receiving coach, T. Martin, deserves a lot of credit because I think a lot of receivers coaches could fail to get the amount of enthusiasm out of this group in this offense.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about Martin and Keith Williams really bringing this group together, and it finally feels like we're starting to, have, bear the fruits of that labor with, Lamar throwing, I think, 10 different guys in New Orleans, hitting Demarcus Robinson a lot against Tampa Bay. It just feels like some of this is starting to come together. They're starting to figure out how to use Prochet more. Still haven't seen much from Tylan Wallace, but again, that's just not every draft pick. Not everything is going to be a hit, and some guys take a little longer than others. But yeah, it does make you feel a little bit better about how this receiving core operates for the rest of the year because they're going to have to focus a lot on these pass catchers, just making catches. Like, the big thing now is just don't drop balls. And I think that that's something that's going to be major for this team moving forward in the playoffs. The guy I really want to shout out, and I guess this probably won't come as a surprise at this point after what we've talked about across this podcast, but Bobby Engram is the Ravens tight end coach, and I think is just massively unheralded as a great coach because he not only is he, he's been with the team for let's see how long now. He's been with the team for 8 seasons. This is his 3rd year as the team's tight end coach. He's overseen the development of Mark Andrews into one of the best tight ends in the league. Before Boyle got injured, he was a big part of Boyle being the best run blocking tight end in the league. Sure, he's part of that is Ricard. And then you look at what he's done with the rookies. He's taken Isaiah Likely and turned him into a legit Y blocker, a guy who can, be a legit threat on both run and pass plays. And again, Josh Oliver, man, I feel like he's probably just stuck to Engram's, side during practices and things like that, and is just picking up as much as he can. But as much credit as Oliver deserves for really putting in the effort and the work to get better, Engram deserves the work for, honestly, I can't think of a better group of tight ends in the league year to year than the Ravens since 2018. And I think a big part of that is just the way Bobby Engram coaches them, the way they go about their assignments. And one of you guys, we've been talking earlier about buy-in. And I think the tight ends buy into this offense almost as much, if not more, than anyone else on the team, partially because it's so built for them. But they're still doing a lot of dirty work. Andrews is doing a lot of blocking still, and he does a great job with it. So definitely shout out to Bobby Engram. Just a phenomenal tight end trio. Trio could be a quartet with Kolar coming back. I don't know what's up with. We still don't quite know what's up with Nick Boyle. Otherwise, it would be probably the best 5 tight ends ever assembled, I gotta say, if all of these guys are playing and healthy. So big shout out to Bobby Engram. Last few awards here. These are a little quicker, just fun memories from the season so far. What's been your favorite game for the Ravens so far this season?
For me, it was Cincinnati, and it feels like kind of a no-brainer. The all-black uniforms, Sunday Night Football, 19-17 on a field goal. Like, if that's not classic Ravens AFC North football, I don't know what it is. The way that they were able to kind of put the clamps on Jamar Chase after he embarrassed us twice last year, him specifically. It was great. It was an awesome game. It was a great time. It was a great time.
Chris?
Tampa Bay. You play a team that looks like they're backed up into a corner. Desperate Tampa Bay team. They needed that win. And they're at home. And the first half is as ugly as a Ravens game could be. And I thought, oh, no, here we go again. And that second half, I'm not saying we will, but if we win a Super Bowl, they do a America's Team episode on this Ravens team because we won the Super Bowl. The narrator is going to say, and at halftime of the Tampa Bay game, the magic clicked in. Because there's something about that game that the answers we didn't have, all of a sudden were there. It's like an open note test. And we finally found that page that has all the things we need. And we just were like, all right, bam, boom, boom,
Greg
boom.
Roman
It was
finally
beautiful.
found the page in the playbook.
Yes. That offense was fun to watch.
To hit, actually hit more of his thing, and he was 8 for 8 in the second half.
Oh, it was great. But the defense, I don't think you've ever had a better case for a defensive coordinator than Mike McDonald against the Buccaneers. Because he always has these adjustment periods where he figures out the other team's punches. And they usually don't score on the first drive. Tampa Bay was one of the only times they did on the first drive this year. And he just adjusted. And he used that against Tampa Bay. He made them think on a third down, oh, you're going to throw this little short pass? I think it was to Godwin. Okay, we almost picked you off and got pressure on Brady. Beautiful play. Tampa Bay, I thought the coaches figured it out. And the players, man, they enjoyed that freaking win. And the second half domination, after we have talked about not being able to close out games, yes.
Yeah, I agree. Massive. And That game was, I don't know, I still don't know what it was about that game that just felt like so satisfying. Was it them not giving up the lead? Was it the clear adjustments that were made at halftime?
Mhm.
I don't know what it was, but I agree that was a great game. I was lucky enough to be in New Orleans for the Saints game. The Superdome is it's pretty cool, pretty weird to watch a game in the dome. But I felt like that was the game that to me was here's how the Ravens get to the playoffs. It's stifling lights out defense. And it's an offense that doesn't rely on Mark Andrews to march them up and down the field. And in fact, just letting Lamar Jackson make reads and make plays with his legs and his arm. And I feel like that is the best version of this offense when they just need to win games, especially against opponents who they're just not as talented. They don't have as good of coaching. They don't have as good of rosters, quarterbacks. They don't have a guy like, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah on the Browns who can very, very effectively go after, not equalize or negate, but counter Lamar. Then you really are just like, look, make quick, easy reads for Lamar. Make quick, easy reads from the run game and in the pass game and just keep moving. Keep the defense back on their heels. Don't be predictable. I felt like Roman did a good job not being too predictable in that game. And so that was probably my favorite game of the year so far because it was very just like run game and defense. Surprise, it's Ravens football back again for the umpteenth time. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who want them to be a more high-octane passing offense, who think they have to be and this and that. But at the end of the day, that formula has gotten to the Ravens to several playoff appearances. It has gotten them in 2 of those playoff appearances. Running game and defense is how you got there. And the passing game lit up with Flacco. But that was partially because other defenses were stacking the box against the run and gave the Ravens that room to operate. And so, it's a matter of trusting Lamar to exploit that later in the season as a passer. But I do think that was kind of the blueprint for games moving forward on how we're going to get to the playoffs at a minimum. One more kind of fun category. And it doesn't have to be like a big touchdown. It can be something little. It can be something that you feel like stood out that was more minor to you. But what was your play of the year? Chris, we'll start with you this time.
I hate being the first on this one. All right. So I'm going to say a play that really got me excited was 3rd down, New Orleans Saints. Roquan Smith says, hello. I think that was just on the spot. It's what I thought of.
I like it.
I think that was the Ravens defense saying, hey, NFL, we're a problem.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, that was my favorite play.
Added Roquan to this defense. I mean, I guess we didn't really talk about favorite move because there's really only one main one that they made. And we haven't mentioned Roquan on this pod, so I think that's a good time to bring him up. I mean, hell of a debut. And the Ravens are, again, I feel like they're 2 steps ahead. They know that the more light boxes you play, the more 2 high cover 2 shells you run, the better your underneath defense, your underneath run defense has to be. And so the margin for your linebackers gets slimmer. And so, you want to upgrade from Josh Bynes, Malik Harrison as your second inside linebacker and move Queen there and have Roquan Smith as your number 1. Suddenly you've turned, I wouldn't say it was a weakness as in terms of teams who are attacking it, but it wasn't necessarily a strength.
I would.
I don't know how much were. I guess we didn't really play any teams that had the right guys to exploit that quite yet. I mean, I guess other than Miami, they did a good job. But you've turned something that was certainly a non-strength into a huge reservoir of strength for this defense, both with how much Smith brings on the field, but also his mind. I mean, he's a very, very smart player, and has just been. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. One thing, the thing about Roquan Smith is you get to the playoffs, you're going to have to go through the Chiefs probably. Travis Kelce, hello, Roquan Smith. You're going to have to go through the Bills. Someone who can spy Josh Allen and make him miserable, Patrick Queen now has the freedom to do that. And so that's 2 of the contenders in the AFC and Miami. We have a more athletic defense, and we can do more to put pressure on Tua with more freedom because we have a linebacker who's not lost when you put him in space. So if you look at the contenders in the AFC and you said, what's the one thing we could add to neutralize some of the biggest problems? Roquan Smith.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Ron, what's been your favorite play of the year so far?
Isaiah Likely's first touchdown against Tampa Bay. It was. I mean, I was.
How did you feel in that moment? Take us through the ball being in the air, headed for Isaiah Likely.
Mere word. Yeah, time stood still.
Safe for work version.
When that ball was. Yeah, when that ball was flying through the air, man, time stood still. That was awesome. And by the way, hell of a throw by Lamar, too. On the run, off his back foot, throws a dart. Not really a dart, but over the head of the linebacker and, like, just ropes it. Mike Edwards is, like, his hand's, like, right here, and it's just beautiful toe tap in the back of the end zone. Just everything about it was awesome.
I think we're big fans of this Tampa Bay game because my favorite play is the Tyler Linderbaum blindside block. And by blindside, I don't mean illegal blindside. No. I mean from the movie The Blind Side.
Michael Oher.
taking Devin White all the way down the field. And he did that more than once, but the time he did it with Lamar keeping – and it was especially a funny play for a few reasons. One, I think the one I'm thinking of specifically, that the one where he took him down the field and then pancaked him – Lamar kept it when he probably should have handed it off, if I'm remembering correctly, and still juked out the edge defender. Edge defender was waiting for Lamar to come his way, and Lamar just put him on the ground and kept running, juked, and just started to juke around guys upfield. And, you just see Lamar kind of skirting in and out, and Linderbaum was just taking this one guy in a straight line downfield, and Lamar's dancing behind him, in front of him, behind him again. And it was just a really funny play, but it was also very much like, this is why they drafted Tyler Linderbaum. This is the kind of football they want to be playing. They are the defense is on their back foot, because how do you handle, Lamar Jackson and a Tyler Linderbaum running at you at once? And the answer is you don't. You get latched onto by Tyler Linderbaum and you flail around until you get slammed into the ground. And, I don't revel. You guys give me a hard time. Because I like to see other players and other teams succeed sometimes. I don't really revel in other teams doing poorly, but it was something to see Todd Bowles. It was something to see Todd Bowles going in on Devin White every time we went back to the sidelines. Like, you're getting demolished by a rookie who's 260 pounds with tiny arms. What's happening? You're supposed to be this great inside linebacker, and Linderbaum was just, what is that phrase? Oh, he was just giving him the business that game. Yes. And that play really, really stood out to me. So really, really excited about Linderbaum and that. And man, I think as we've talking, that game in general is just a really big game for this team. Final thing before we log off this evening is just your quick predictions for the rest of the season. The Ravens currently sit. I want to make sure I get this right so I don't sound like an idiot talking about the Ravens. Ravens currently sit at 6-3. They are first in the AFC North. Remaining their games, I'll just list them off in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. 2 months of football left. That's not enough football. Panthers at home. Jacksonville Jaguars away. Broncos at home. At Pittsburgh. At Cleveland. Home to the Falcons. Pittsburgh at home. And going to visit Cincinnati Bengals to close out the season. So you don't need to give me a game by game. But what do you think is the Ravens' overall record for the next 8 games? Chris?
We're going to lose one game that we shouldn't have any business of losing. It'll probably be a division game, maybe the second game against the Browns or a game against the Steelers. We're going to lose one game because, let's be realistic, the Ravens always have a game where they just don't show up. There's going to be the sleepwalk game. We're going to think the sky is falling, even though our record's going to be great. That's what we do every year. Come on. That's what we do every year. But I don't see more than one loss in this schedule. I'm sorry, I don't. We are going 13-4, and we are going to be the second or third seed in the playoffs. And you know what? I almost kind of hope we don't get the bye, because I don't want 2019 again. I just can't stand the having to wait for it thing. I want to keep the momentum.
This is wrong. It is you automatically get a win in the playoffs. You don't have to play a game in the playoffs and you win. There is no reason for not wanting a bye. I will die on this hill. There is no reason. Well, it is one less game.
We've won the Super Bowl twice. One less game
you can lose and get knocked out.
We've won the Super Bowl twice. Neither times were with a bye. We've lost in 2006 with a team that should have won the Super Bowl. The best defense other than maybe the greatest of all time in 2000. We lost in 2019 on a team that was an absolute buzzsaw, just tearing teams up. All right. You are correct theoretically. But with John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens, I almost don't want the bye. And if that makes me crazy,
crazy.
Hey, if that makes me crazy, I'm fine.
Give me your take on the bye and then your season prediction.
Yeah, give me the bye.
Thank you.
You get an auto. That's not to say I don't understand where you're coming from.
Well-oiled machines keep the momentum.
Especially considering that's how the Ravens have won both of their Super Bowls. So I totally understand what you're saying. I personally am just move us on as quick as we can, you know what I mean? And as far as we can. I got 2 losses on the schedule. I think we drop either one of the Cleveland or Pittsburgh game and the second Cincinnati game, but with the caveat that game is not going to matter. I think by that point we will have the 3 seed locked up. I think Buffalo gets the 2. Just because the tiebreaker that they have over us now is ultimately going to be that tipping point. I think Miami is going to still be really good, but kind of have a bit of a regression to the mean in the back half here. And I think Buffalo ends up taking that division. So we'll probably be resting some guys week 18. We'll have that because I don't see whoever's coming out of the AFC South isn't going to be 12-5 like we're going to be. So
I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm kind of curious to see how much that game matters for us and the Bengals. You know, I could see it being a win and in for the Bengals. I could see the Bengals falling apart down the stretch and not being part of the postseason picture by week 18. Honestly, I mean, week 7, I still think they're in it probably up to week 16, 17, but they could, you know, that game may not matter as much.
They have the hardest schedule down the stretch. It's
and they'll still be.
I never thought the Bengals were that.
Try to knock us off, but at the same time, you know, like you're saying, if it's only beating us and there's no playoff seeding, you know, up, we're not going to put guys out there. They've been pretty clear about that this whole year, how much they're protecting their players' health, you know, after what happened last year. Chris, you were going to say?
Yeah, I'm not afraid of the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a year where there's no excuse not to win the division. And I never thought the Bengals were that good. You take Jamar Chase off that offense. He's been hurt. He's going to come back soon. But you take Jamar Chase out of that offense, Joe Burrow is human, and that offensive line, you were talking about improvement of the most minimal sort. So I think the Bengals are incredibly beatable. And with that schedule, they're dropping at least 2 more games. And I don't think we're dropping 2. So they're already a game behind us. Plus, remember, the Bengals lost to the Steelers and the Browns and the Ravens. They're 0-3 in division play. So
they're scheduled the rest of the way. Just let me read it off really quick. Steelers, Titans, Chiefs, Browns, Bucks, Patriots, Bills, Ravens.
Ooh,
there's 3 losses in that for the Bengals. There are 3 losses in that for the Bengals.
3 to 4.
Especially going to New England, you know, for some reason, good offenses go to New England and they just, you know, forget how to operate. We didn't this year, thankfully. But, you know, I think that, you know, that defense is like the #1 fantasy defense. They're still playing great ball. So,
Patriots don't do stupid things.
Yeah, God, I think you guys are spot on. I think my game that I kind of have more circled on the calendar that I'm kind of really looking at is going to Jacksonville week 11 because they're going to be coming out at their bye. This is a team that looked really, really good to start the season. And while some of that has faded, that doesn't mean that the circumstances that allowed them to put together some of those wins have disappeared. I mean, they fought a hard game against the Eagles. They destroyed the Chargers. But yeah, I mean, since then they've dropped
Kansas City.
And then Mike McDonald says, "Please let me get Trevor Lawrence. Please." Yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to take a beating in that game.
Yeah, but I think, you know, they're going to come out of a bye. They're going to have 2 whole weeks after what was a decent game against Kansas City. I mean, you know, I think they force 3 turnovers against Kansas City, or did they give up 3 turnovers against Kansas City? But either way, I mean, I think that this is a team that has still shown they can be dangerous. And I think that of all the games left in our schedule, I think that is the trappiest of them all because, you know, you think about the Falcons. You think about the Falcons, you think about, you know, the Panthers. We know who the Broncos are. I don't think we've ever taken the Broncos really lightly as a team because they still have the Panthers, the Falcons. I'm just not worried about them in the same way as I am Jacksonville because Jacksonville has the talent. They have a good QB, and they can actually put something together on both sides of the ball in a way that I just don't see Atlanta and Carolina doing for 4 quarters against this Ravens team. So that's kind of the one game I have scheduled. I do think there is one loss of these 8. I think the Ravens will lose one game of their own accord. And then I agree with Ron that last game against Cincy may not even matter. And if it's, depending on exactly what time the game is played, the Ravens may, if it gets flexed to 4:00 or something like that, I think it's supposed to be a 1 p.m. game now. If it gets flexed to 4:00, maybe they see that the Bills won and secured the 2 seed or whatever. And they're like, okay, we're going to give some guys a rest, things like that. Because again, that's been such a priority for them this year. So seems like we're all pretty much on board with the Ravens hitting 13-4 this year. That would definitely be a playoff spot. Obviously winning the division, that's at least the 3 seed. I think they definitely have a shot at the 2 or 1 seed. But you do need a lot more help to get there. Buffalo's been looking, shaky. Kansas City, you can just never really bet against anymore. I still think Kansas City ends up locking up the 1 seed, but I still think we'll be in play for the 2 seed. And then that gets us to the playoffs. And then this is kind of the big question. Halfway through the year, do you think this team has what it takes to make the AFC Championship? I think that, to me, is the measure of a successful season for any competitive team, is making the conference championship game, because at that point, you've made the playoffs. You've gotten through 2 rounds. A lot at that point is up to the football gods, I think. I think we've seen that in years past. So I confidently think this team can make the AFC Championship game this year. And to me, that is a success. I think that's what you aim for every year, because from then on, it is just the little things, luck, and the tiny little things that take your team over the top that you really can't adjust for.
Yeah, totally. I absolutely think they can make the AFC Championship. I think the 4 in the AFC, like the 4 legitimate contenders, Buffalo, Kansas City, us, and Miami. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get my words and watch now when the Jets are in the Super Bowl. But
that would be sick. So
if it wasn't us, that would be pretty sweet. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, no, I absolutely think they can, especially, just got Bowser back. Ajabo is going to be coming back. We get to see what Charlie Kolar is going to do. Just a lot, and just the acquisition of Roquan Smith already paying dividends. Yeah, I think they've got the dogs in the right places, and as long as the receiver thing doesn't become like a major issue, and it doesn't just become what it's become a lot in the playoffs for the Ravens, which is just teams stacking the box against Lamar and like him having a bit of a tough time with it. As long as that doesn't happen again, I think it's not only we can, I think we will.
I agree. I think will is what I should have added to my comment. I think we will make the AFC Championship game this year. Chris, your thoughts?
I think we win the Super Bowl, guys.
All right.
Look, I'm not even trying to be biased. Look, if I believe we have a shot in the playoffs, I believe we have a shot to win the Super Bowl. I'm not going to beat around the bush and say, I think we'll get to the AFC. No, I think we win the damn thing. Look, this is a year defense can win a championship. Scoring's down. Our defense is getting better every single week. We're getting Tyus Bowser back, David Ajabo. Like, this defense continues to get better. If Marcus Williams comes back, and by the way, Marcus Williams would have been the defensive MVP if he didn't get hurt. He was on his way. But I think we win the Super Bowl. Every time we've won the Super Bowl, we've had a couple of games in the beginning of the year or at some point in the year where we're like, I don't know if this team can do it. I've completely lost faith. Look, the prettiest team never wins. 2019 should have won the Super Bowl. But you know what? 2011 should have won the Super Bowl, right? We are finally on track to where we were in 2019. We've built the bully back up. We have the weakest schedule. We're going to rack up some wins. We're going to get some confidence. And we are going to play Ravens football, and we're going to win the Super Bowl. And if we don't win the Super Bowl, we're going to come very, very close. Anyone who doesn't believe in this team, I don't know what you've been watching, because we've literally come from a scrambled egg mess to we're a beautiful omelet right now. We're a beautiful omelet, baby. Dude, I'm telling you, every week I keep saying, every week I say in the pump up videos, stay hungry, because everything we want is on the table. I've never seen a year where it lays out everything we want's on the table. This division sucks this year. Everything we want is on the table. Win the Super Bowl, no excuses. I don't care. That's it.
Chris is all about it, and man, I think that's one thing you mentioned is having those tough losses earlier in the year really got this team, set on the right track. And it's almost like I feel like you talk a lot of teams, a lot of analysts talk about having, that those losses, those midseason adjustments, those things that force you to change. And I think weirdly having that happen over the first stretch of the season so early, kind of like in 2019, lets you get those foundational fundamental issues, whatever's going on, out of the way very quickly. And then the rest of the season, you're still making adjustments, but it's a lot smaller things, and you're really able to get in the fine-grained detail. I think like the specific ways guys are hitting blocks, for example, that has just really, really dialed in over the course of the year because they were able to kind of throw out some stuff that didn't work early and really hone in on what is working. And so, I'm less confident than you without Rashad Bateman. I think having Bateman was huge to this team being able to come up with it in big games in the playoffs. But I also, like you're saying, it is that kind of feel where there isn't a powerhouse. I would say if any team feels like a powerhouse, it might actually be the Dolphins, weirdly, just because McDaniel with Hill and Waddle just feels so unstoppable. And, but then Mahomes, they're starting to figure out how to use Tony. The Bills are the Bills, but they're slowing down. And so I think you're right that this is, what looked like a crazy stacked AFC has just been beaten down into, I would say one clear top team in the Chiefs. And then the rest of us are just, fighting for a position. And then again, on any given Sunday against the Chiefs.
Mark my words.
As we know,
Mark my words. We are going to go against, in the playoffs, we are most inevitably going to go against the Chiefs and the Bills in whatever order it is. And it really feels like going through Manning and Brady to get to the ultimate prize. Last year, I said it's got this weird 8-3. We have no business being 8-3. It feels like 2012. It felt like 2012. And I'm getting that feeling again. And this year, the sky isn't falling and everyone isn't hurt. And it's just, I haven't felt that we were going to win the Super Bowl in 2020. In 2019, I was like, oh, God, this is a magic carpet ride. We're going to do this right. But in the back of my mind, I was like, this is too easy. The team that rolls through the season never wins. This is why the Eagles will not win the Super Bowl. Because the 15-1 Packers lost to the Eli Manning Giants. The undefeated Patriots lost to the Giants of the Super Bowl. What is it with the Giants beating Giants?
Eli Manning.
Yeah. But how many times did Peyton Manning win?
Yeah.
How many times did Peyton Manning win 14 games? All right.
I think this team is prepared defensively in a way that they have not been in seasons past. And I think that is going to allow them to dictate and control games more than they were able to in past postseasons. Felt like in past postseasons, other teams were able to dictate game flow. This year, with a lockdown defense, McDonald has really dialed in. I think they're going to be able to control games. And Chris, I'm excited as you are. Everyone watching, I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're going to try and get this episode up on Spotify soon. And enjoy
the video. Like the video.
Yes, please like and subscribe to the Rush Street Report channel. It's not something we've mentioned before, but should probably be something that gets in there. Because
we're one of those YouTube channels now, so get ready.
Yeah.
Coming. Oh, yeah.
Like and subscribe for more, because the more you like, the more you'll get. So thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great night.